Welcome to Hey Tabi, the podcast where we talk about the hard things out loud with our actual lips. We'll cover all kinds of topics across the mental health spectrum, including how it intersects with the Christian faith. Nothing is off limits here, and we are not take 2 verses and call me in the morning. I'm Tabitha Westbrook, and I'm a licensed trauma therapist, but I'm not your trauma therapist. I'm an expert in domestic abuse and coercive control, and how complex trauma impacts our health and well-being. Our focus here is knowledge and healing. Trauma doesn't have to eat your lunch forever. There is hope. Now, let's get going. Welcome to this week's episode of Hey Tabi. I am super excited. This has been a long time coming, and I am glad that we are finally here. I am going to chat today with Sam Jolman, and Sam wrote one of my favorite books of 2024, and we are definitely going to talk about that. But let me tell you who he is. He is a licensed professional counselor and trauma therapist with over 20 years of experience, specializing in men's issues and sexual trauma recovery. Being a therapist has given him a front row seat to hear hundreds of men and women share their stories. His writing flows out of this unique opportunity to help people know and heal their stories and find greater sexual wholeness and aliveness. He received his master's in counseling from Reformed Theological Seminary and was further trained in narrative-focused trauma care through the Allender Center at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. And y'all know we love some narrative-focused trauma care up in here. Sam lives in Colorado with his wife and 3 sons, and together they enjoy exploring the best camping spots in Colorado in a pop-up camper. Sam goes to therapy, loves fly fishing, and can often be found trying to catch his breath on the floor of his local CrossFit gym. I could not do that. We're going to read more about Sam at his website, on his Substack, and in various places, but all of his links will be in the description. Sam, welcome.
Tabi, it is so good to be here. It has been a long time coming, and I'm equally honored to be here because I am a chapter into your book. And oh my goodness, as we talked beforehand, I'm loving it. It has such gravitas, such a deep dive, and I'm already feeling invited, challenged, cared for in chapter 1. I'm equally honored to meet you. This has been a long time coming because we also share a writing coach.
We do.
Who has helped us birth books, which has been super meaningful.
Yes, absolutely.
Shout out to our friend Ruth.
She is incredible. I love her so much.
She's incredible.
I want to hear about how this book came about for you. And one of the things I love the most about it is its invitational nature. You tell stories so well, and it is so gentle, yet also unapologetic in beautiful ways. So tell me, how did we get here?
Yeah. Well, my whole life, right? At some level, I'm writing this book, as we all do as authors to some degree, to ourselves. And so I'm writing this book to my younger self, the young man that didn't get a sex talk, and in all the ways that did not go well in my life, all the ways that I had such a wildly ambivalent relationship with my own sexuality, and in many ways felt like I was set up to believe my sexuality is the enemy and that it is inherently bad and that it's inherently lustful as a man. And I can remember for example, when I met my wife, feeling like she was too attractive and believing like that can't be good because I feel so excited about her. I feel so aroused by her. I feel so attracted to her. That can't be good, right? That's got to be bad because God doesn't do that. And when she said yes and things worked out with her and we had our own journey to getting from that moment of me meeting her to marriage, but it felt like this is too scandalous. And what is that, right? What was that in my story that was driving me away from my sexuality, away from a good expression of it? So that was a moment, right, that inspired me to write this book because I did have a few places where that sexual aliveness was being welcomed and affirmed, primarily through being in a therapist's office, a few pastors, a few guides in my life, mentors, but it was rare and it felt like a lost understanding of how to embody sexuality well. And then it all came to a head at the Me Too movement when, with the whole world, I think, at least the Western world, wrestling with the impact of male sexuality on women and on men as well through this disclosure and connecting to stories of abuse. Anywhere from the, what we might call the more daily, quote
Hmm.
unquote, minor, obviously not minor, catcalling, sexualization of men, right? To outright, sexual trauma and abuse. And there was a question of like, is this just male sexuality? Is it just this broken? Is it just this monstrous? And obviously, being a Christian and knowing this is a creation of God's, there's no way this is it. But what is the vision? How do you embody this well as a man? So, again, trying to speak to that young man, but also then feeling this call to invite men to a greater vision of how do you embody sexuality well? How can it be a gift, not just to you, but to the world?
Yes. Yeah. And that is one of the things that I loved about it is that, I think in the church we language it in a couple of different ways, right? Men are nothing but their lust. This is what purity culture taught us, right?
Yes.
You can't help it. If you don't have sex every 72 hours, you will explode. And my friend Jason Van Ruler has reminded us all of this. This is my favorite fact of 2024 that I learned. The only mammal that can die if they do not have an orgasm is a female ferret. And that is factually correct. It is my favorite fact of all time at this point.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yes, it is the best. And I told him I was going to use it in everything, and I do. But like we've distilled our brothers down to nothing
Yes.
but their lust.
Yeah.
And that is not what God says about men. He says that
Yes.
they are image bearers of the living God, just like women. And we've distilled women down to, well, I'm my brother's gatekeeper. And so if I don't dress a certain way, give it up a certain amount of times, whatever,
Hmm.
and I don't please him sexually, then he is just going to
Hmm.
be given over to pornography or affairs.
Hmm.
And none of that is true. And none of that
Yes.
is biblical.
Yes.
And it has harmed us both so much.
Yes. Yes. Right. In other words, to accept that you're an animal as a man, right? That's all you are, is just an animal. And it's every man's battle, and you'll just barely be able to fight lust your whole life, if you can even do that. And like you said, right, you need your daily or 72-hour vitamin called sex, and that a woman has to give it to you. In other words, that it's not even mutual, right? That it's something you have a right to, even. It's awful. It's a horrible story for men and women.
It
I would
is. And
agree.
it makes us opposed to each other. It makes us afraid of each other. And it harms the
Yes.
brother sister relationship in the body of Christ, too, which is ridiculous because, I actually was leading a group last night and we were talking about male female friendships together. And one of the things that we were talking about is if we are the body, we, men and women, are
Mhm.
the body of Christ,
Yes.
aren't we cutting off half the body if we focus on one to the exclusion of the other?
Yes.
And that is such a pale version of what God has called us to. And it's such a beautiful version when
Yes.
we are allowed to flourish. And we were all created sexual beings. Like it is
Yes.
part of our creation.
Yes. Yes. Right. And it's a witness to something, right? Not just for, as you said, the act of sex,
Hmm.
right? Alone. It is a witness that you are wired for pleasure, right? Research would say you have 8 to 10,000 nerve endings, both men and women, in your genitalia. That's a witness to something, that God wants you to experience pleasure in his good world. You also have 4,000 taste buds, right? And this is a God who wired you for pleasure. That's not a part of the fall. You're meant to enjoy the world. You're meant to enjoy relationship. And yes, including sex itself, but I think it's also that it's a witness to something about God's heart. Our friend Dan Allender would say that love is the giving and receiving of pleasure to the glory of
Yes.
God, which I've loved that definition, that love in itself is a pleasure that we're
Yes.
meant to experience, not just the act of sex, not just an orgasm or release.
Right. There's so much more. And you and I talked a little bit about this before we even started, but I'm actually going to start this part of the conversation with a quote from your book because this is like it's on all of page 26 before I was like, oh my goodness, this is
Mhm.
it right here. And I love the way you say this. And I've used this so often
Mm.
with the guys that I work with who are caught in compulsive sexual behavior because they have been so habituated in such the wrong way and they're using it in a way for comfort. And it's obviously harmful to them, harmful to their spouses. But this is the quote. Authentic sexuality requires a connection to your body and self so that you can tune into your partner. Without sensuality, sexuality does not work. Everything goes wrong. The mechanics require the proper poetics. And I love that, the mechanics and the
Mm,
poetics of sex. The
mm,
way that you language that is so helpful.
mm,
You say it becomes about getting an orgasm when we're just looking at the mechanics. I'd venture to say that sexual sin is not about too much desire, but rather too little sensuality. Or, as I said in the introduction, too little heart. And I was like, yes,
mm, mm.
absolutely. So, when you really just focus on the practice, the penis and the vagina, then you
Yes.
lose the heart.
Yes. Yes, right. So, I'm borrowing that line from author Esther Perel, where I first got it, which changed my life when I heard it. The poetics of sex, right? The mechanics being like how the plumbing works, which is if you got a sex talk, maybe you got that. And again, probably a very basic version of that, which probably left out women's pleasure altogether because it was named of penis and a vagina, not a
Mhm.
vulva, right? And so even there, the setup is already against women. But nevertheless, that's the mechanics, how it fits together, which even that in itself is already a more complex conversation because 85% of couples at some point in their marriage have physical sexual dysfunction, let alone the emotional struggles and relational struggles of intimacy. But yeah, but Esther Perel talks about the poetics of sex is the realm of desire. What's running the show,
Mhm.
right? What's bringing the mechanics together and what's animating it? And as I say in the book, I believe all sexuality lives in a story. It is always telling a story. It's always being driven by a story. It's never just a bodily function like a sneeze or a cough or using the bathroom. It's a function driven by the story you're living, the intimacy you're living, the day you're having, right? As you've named, right? That pull towards comfort and seeing sexuality as an act of comfort, right? And that's where I think we need to begin to ask the question, what's going on in your heart? Not just what's going on in your body. What's driving it? What's animating it?
And I love how you talk about desire because for so many people, especially survivors of abuse, desire is a four-letter word with more than four letters because it feels like you're not even allowed. Like, what am I even saying? Especially for women.
Yeah.
Women are told we're not allowed to desire anything. We're just supposed to
Yeah.
like lay there, which is ridiculous. But,
Yes.
I think for men, oftentimes desire and consumption have been intertwined and they are not the same, right?
Mhm.
Lust is consumptive. That's where Jesus talks about adultery and lust being the same. And it is not because you want something, it's because you want to consume someone
Yes.
and you're using them for your pleasure without any focus on their well-being, their pleasure, their desire, their anything. And
Yes.
so I say basically that when a man looks at sexuality that way, that they basically are seeing their partner as a blow-up doll with a pulse.
Yes.
And that
Yep.
is not the way that it was intended. True desire is for connection, not
Yes.
consumption.
Yes. Right. Right. I mean, Adam in the Garden of Eden, right? The first person to meet another person naked, Eve, right?
Mhm,
While he is also naked, right? The first thing he does is not simply procreate and go
mhm,
for sex. He waxes eloquent in poetry about I've met my person, right? The intimacy that's now possible, the sense of belonging he felt to her. In other words, he starts with all the intimacy he's anticipating with her. You're bone of my bone, you're flesh of my flesh, you're my people, you're my
mhm.
person. Right. And when you leave that out, interestingly, as I'm sure you experience in the safety of a counseling office, I have men all the time say to me, I hate sex that's just for sex.
Mhm.
Right. But they feel like they have to kind of hide that. Like I had a man who literally does counseling, and I have permission to share this from the cab of his construction truck on his lunch breaks on the job site. And he says, as a man, I know I'm supposed to always get it up and just be ready to get it up. And that's all I want, right? Is just be always ready. But he said, he was grieving how much he missed romance with his wife
Mhm.
It had been a season they couldn't date because of life circumstances. They just hadn't had time for that connection. And he said, I think I'm really missing that. I actually want the emotional stuff.
Mhm.
But again, feeling like he has to confess it like in the secrecy of a counseling office, right? What is this image of masculine sexuality that we've created that all
Right.
men want is just an orgasm? They just want to get off, right? Food and sex. Just give them food
Right.
and sex, and that's all they want. It's so minimizing. It's so
Yes.
minimizing, both to men and to women, obviously.
Yes. And it doesn't represent the good brothers that I know at all.
Yes.
The only men I have ever seen who have said, I just want what I want, are destructive men, the abusers of the world, the
Yes.
coercive controllers of the world.
Well
And they
said.
do not see their partners as humans. Honestly, they do not see them as
Yes.
image bearers of God. They see them as an object to serve them. And that's a whole other mentality that
Yes.
is a problem. But most men, the ones who are not coercively controlling abusers, they are wanting that connection, but they've never been given the words and the language
Yeah.
and the invitation to be there.
Yeah.
One of the things that I always found fun in couples counseling, I don't get to do it as much anymore, but is I have the power to make grown men cry apparently. And I'd have wives go, "What did you do?" Like, I've never seen him cry. And all I did was
Yeah.
see his heart and
Yeah.
say, "Oh, you have such desire. There's this
Yeah.
tenderness there." And then all of the walls just start to crumble and they're like, "You must be piping in tear gas." And I'm like, "No, man, you're just seeing. You're just seeing."
Yeah. Yes. Right. Right. And, you know, again, back to what you named, which is the church sets up the vision of men, which is that picture of the abuser, the guy who just wants sex. I think that's well said. Those are the most haunting experiences I've ever had in counseling as well. When I'm sitting across from somebody that's abusive and you get that haunting feeling of you're here to control. You're not here on the same terms as your wife, are you?
Mm-mm.
You're in this for something more than intimacy. And again, unfortunately, that's often the script the church writes that men are. And so we become blind, as you named so well, then to seeing that as no, that's actually an abuser. That's not the image of God in a man. I say often, like, and this feels revolutionary, but it's just truth that men are equally as capable as women at experiencing emotional connection and attachment.
Yes.
There's nothing different in a man that prevents him from experiencing healthy emotional attachment and secure attachment. Right. But even that, we're like, what? Really? Men want that stuff?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Men want that stuff all day. That's what I sit with when I sit with men.
Yes. And men, when they are invited into a safe space to express it and to
Yes.
start to get real about it and to start, I call it family of origin rules, right? Like, so the things that we
Yes.
were maybe grown up with, that grown men don't cry, I mean, this is baseball. There's no crying in baseball, right? From League of Their
Uh-huh.
Own, that kind of deal.
Right.
When we invite men into that different place to go, no, like, what does it mean to truly be an image bearer? And Jesus wept, right? My favorite verse in the Bible, super easy
Yep.
to memorize, but also he already knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He knew what was coming and he still felt the pain. He
Yes.
still felt the compassion. He still wept with people. And it wasn't like a sniffle, sniffle, it was wailing.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when we invite our brothers into those spaces of be all you were created to be, let's get familiar with those
Yeah.
deep places and that deep well within you. Gosh, man, that's where healing
Right.
takes place.
Right. It's almost like if you just tell a man, this is in you, right? Then they feel free to go there finally and admit it. My publisher, my editor was hesitant at first with my use of the language of lover, right? My first chapter is You Are a Lover.
Mm.
And I came out of the gate hoping, to get punchy with, we're going to go here. And my publisher was like, oh man, my editor especially, like, I hope men connect to that. Are men going to
Mhm.
connect to that? And ultimately, they agreed and said, let's go for it. And he said, I think they will. But we had that conversation, and it's been amazing a year in now to the book being launched, how deeply men connect to that word. It's
Mhm.
been a gift to me to notice, like, oh, you get it, right? It's in you. It just
Mhm.
has to be called out of you and initiated. And I talk, in that first chapter about how I felt God initiated the lover in me, or a couple scenes of that. But
Mhm.
right, it's almost like if you just tell men you're fully capable of this. This is God's image in you. Then they feel empowered to go there more. But if you
Yeah.
tell them, no, you're just a lustful animal, all you really want is the sexual release, the romance is for the women. What a dumb thing. How did we get there? Right? I mean,
Right.
we have like Song of Songs, which is erotic love poetry,
Yes.
which is all about romance. And both the man and the woman are writing it to each
Yes.
other,
And they're
right? Like,
both desirous. They're
right,
both talking about desire. They are both together and they're boundaried, right? At one point she says no and he leaves. And she's like,
right.
"Oh," and I think like the Song of Songs has been one of the worst books taught ever because it's always used for premarital counseling. And it's like, so your wedding night's going to be this. And I'm like, oh, for the love. First of all,
Right,
I'd like you to talk about what the marriage is going to be like and how do we have a conversation. And there's a lot more to it. But
right.
how do we have real intimacy? And I think it was Sue Johnson who created emotionally focused couples therapy that said it this way: intimacy means into me you see.
Mm,
And everybody
mm.
needs to be seen, both men and women.
Yes. Yes. That word in Genesis of Adam and Eve, Adam knew Eve,
Hmm.
right? Seeing sex as a knowing,
Yeah.
right? And I know Sheila Gregoire has pointed this out, that same word is used in Psalm 139, right? Where David is talking about, you searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my
Mhm.
thoughts from afar, right? And you can almost hear that as like lovers saying, you could finish my sentences, right? You
Yes.
know what I love and what I don't like.
Mhm.
You know my deepest hurts, right? That's the kind of intimacy that's intended. I love that language from
Yeah,
Sue Johnson.
absolutely. And, as you were talking about that, it reminded me of the love maps from the Gottmans, right?
Mm,
This is your baseline of knowing your partner. What makes them them? And Diane Langberg talks about that. Like as when she's training counselors, like the
mhm.
first thing you're supposed to do is who is this person in front of me? What makes them them? Right.
Yeah.
And that should be the first thing in marriage because that
Yes.
matters. And
Yes.
so we're teaching people go have this raucous wedding night and having these ridiculous bachelorette parties. Some of the bridal showers I've been to in the evangelical church are suspect because it's like, here's a lingerie party. And it's like, this is not, no, ew. It's
Yeah.
like you're distilling down the entire marriage to the wedding night, which often doesn't live up to
Right.
what people expect anyway, because especially if you did wait till marriage, you don't know what you're doing. No
Right.
one knows what they're doing. And if
Right.
it's your second marriage, you still don't know what you're doing because you don't know this person.
Right.
And so, leaning in and going, what do I like? And we are not teaching that. We
Nope.
are not teaching what is comfortable for you. And that comes out of intimacy and
Mhm.
knowing your partner, just knowing them in general outside of intercourse and
Mhm.
sexual contact, but then also knowing them in terms of how can we have these conversations about what's okay and what's not okay here.
Yep.
And if there's been sexual harm, and in this day and age, 1 in 6 men and 1 in 4 women
Yep.
have been sexually harmed in some way. And that's
Yep.
probably low on the
Yep.
statistic.
Right.
How are we entering in together to say, let me be tender with you? Let me know you so that we can come together well.
Right. Right. I love that what you're saying there. In other words, to know each other's stories in a
Mhm.
way that would say, I know your triggers, or I can at least
Mhm.
anticipate what experiences might be tender for you. And to be able to have, the possibility that we can always stop, right?
Yes.
Sex can always be stopped, the play of
Hmm.
sex, to address what's happening in your body that might be painful, right? Or whether we stop altogether or we
Hmm.
pause, but right where there's that tenderness to say, bringing you along with me is the point. It's
Yes.
not to get to some physical release, you know, which Alexandra Katahakis, I think I'm saying that right,
Yep.
in
Alex
her book.
Katahakis. Yep.
Okay, who says, sex for some men becomes a kind of almost autoerotic thing. It's not even partnered,
Yeah.
right? It's not even dyadic. It's just simply you're, as you named, you're a blow up doll that's going to get me off.
Mhm.
And again, it's so degrading to women. It is so degrading to men as well.
Yes,
Say that's all
absolutely.
you are.
Yep.
Rather than actually, you're a really good lover who can read and attune to your partner, and you'll be able to stop and address her pain, right? Or your
Mhm.
own.
Yes, or your own, because men have pain too.
Yes. Right. You know, I tell some of this story in the book that I did not know that I had a story of sexual harm when I went into marriage. But what I knew is when my wife would initiate intimacy in our first couple years of marriage, even if it was just affection in the kitchen, like a hug, my whole body would bristle and tighten up, and I would lock up like a board. And she would obviously begin to read my body. Something had changed and I was not enjoying this. And she would back away. And it felt very personally rejecting, understandably. And I remember in our first couple of years of marriage, she said to me, I need you to do something about this. Like, what's going on? And I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what was going on in my body when she would hug me. And again, if I initiated, it was fine, right? Because again, I had power. I felt I had agency. But if she initiated, my body would bristle and my body was telling my story.
Mhm.
And so that's, at that point in our intimacy, I went into counseling really with an unknown. I don't know what I'm addressing. I just know my wife experiences this. I love her. I don't know why I'm doing this.
Mhm.
I enjoy her. And it began my journey into a deeper dive of my own story, my own sexual harm, to begin to understand the symbolism of my trigger, the symbolism of my lockup. So yes, men, you have a story. And I'm not saying you
Mhm.
have an overt story of sexual harm, right? Of sexual abuse, but it's highly likely, it's possible, 1 in 6, but men are notoriously less outspoken about their
Yeah.
abuse. So it's probably higher. Men tend to take it as I must have been perverted or I must have been weird. Obviously,
Mhm.
women take that as well.
Yeah.
With that and with that belief, that's how we bury our stories of abuse. But you have stories that have shaped you sexually. There's an ongoing story, and it's probably a silent one. It's probably an unspoken one that's in the subtext. Yes, those stories show up when you try to move towards intimacy.
They do. They do. And, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about this that for those of us that did grow up in the evangelical church, or in the church in general, I wonder how much covert sexual abuse or sexual
Yes.
dysfunction at the very least has been languaged just in what men say. And like you had mentioned earlier, the phrase every man's battle, which makes me unnaturally mad because of the book of the same name and the wickedness that I believe that perpetrates.
Hmm.
And just looking at that and telling men, well, you're going to struggle with lust and struggle with porn and that sort of thing, when that is not, in fact, actually true.
Hmm.
And how many guys have been sexually abused through someone showing them pornography
Yes.
or something similar, or having it languaged, or having a youth pastor that was talking about it or that made
Hmm.
sexually suggestive comments. I mean, we have pastors that get up whose sermons are on the internet talking about their smoking hot wife. That is not about her personhood. That is about her
Yes.
body and what they can
Yep.
get from it. And so I wonder how much, if I'm being just really brutally honest, the church has perpetuated sexual harm.
Right. Yep.
And I love the church. Don't get me wrong. Like, I love
Mm-hmm.
Jesus. I love the church. I think that it is a beautiful place, but I do think that we have to recognize spaces of brokenness.
Hmm. Right. And there's something about the minimizing as well of, as you named, like, oh, how we just say, well, it's just lust. We tend to put it in these categories that are often spiritually bypassing of it, to
Yeah.
say, well, he struggles with us or that pastor stumbled or, right. Whether it's even in the teaching or just in how we script when harm does happen, right. Is we don't use the language of trauma and abuse. We'll say it was sin or it was even, he struggles with lust. But we don't understand even there that lust is primarily about power.
Yes.
And so again, we think of it as it's just an overabundance of sexual urge that sort of spilled over, right? Like, and how could you blame him, right? The cup's full. It just spills over the side sometimes, right? And rather than seeing it as a very intentional act of grasping at power, of
Yep.
ego stroking, right?
Hmm.
That's what lust is. It is not primarily about sexual release. It is at that, but more in the name of the ego
Hmm.
and the ego's pride. So again, yes, we don't look darkness in the face. And we should be the bravest ones, as our friend Dan Allender says.
Absolutely. And you know, I think about some of the things that Dan has in Healing the Wounded Heart, which is one of my favorite books for sexual harm of all time.
Yes.
And even in that, because of the time period when he wrote it, even the 20-year update, that he speaks mainly to women's harm in a lot of ways. And there is a lot of harm for women.
Hmm.
But as we're thinking about this, I'm like, well, how many men were invited into pornography and sexual
Right.
dysfunction by their own fathers,
Hmm.
by uncles? Oh, hey, watch
Hmm.
this with me. This is what we do, you know, while you have a beer when you're 13 or whatever. And that is such a form of harm.
Yes.
Oh,
Right.
and
Right.
it's breaking my heart right now.
Yes. Yes. You know, most men hold that as their shame. Well, I looked at porn, but they don't ever stop to wrestle with the setup.
Hmm.
It's so, as you're naming so well, so many men's first experience of pornography is actually a story of sexual abuse, of sexual harm, where you were sexualized by somebody, even if that was quote unquote passively by a father who left his pornography in the garage or in the attic or by his nightstand, right? And this is back in the time of where magazines were more popular, but also including, the kid that says, "Hey, come look at this on his phone."
Yeah.
And before you know it, you're watching a scene of porn, right?
Hmm.
That's a form of sexualization. Somebody sexualized you. Somebody invited you in without your consent. And you need to be informed to be
Hmm.
consensual. You also need to be an adult. So again, to say you don't know what you're consenting to if you're under 18.
Right. Yeah. You don't. You can't. Your
Mhm.
prefrontal cortex is not wired together. You
Yes.
cannot.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And again, I would say, to men that hold, so many men I talk with hold that story as I was perverted.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
looked, I was curious. And again, feeling the contempt for their own perversion,
Right.
or their own arousal.
Right. But
Yeah.
we're meant to be curious. You
Mhm.
know, all of these things, desire, curiosity, that you talk about the play of sex in your book, which I adored, especially for so many trauma survivors. We have had play stolen from us in
Yes.
every realm, you know, including relationships.
Yes.
And looking at the overall play of sex and going, this is meant to be delightful. This is meant to be delighting. It is meant
Yes.
to be good. God
Yes.
created it as good. And, you know, to invite people into that place. And so when you are exposed to something you shouldn't be, and look, man, people who create pornography, their goal is to keep you stuck because that's how they make their money. Let's be honest,
Mhm.
follow the dollar. And
Mhm.
when we look at that and we go, ah, of course your desire was played upon. Your delight was played upon. Of course it was. And we need to hold the purveyors of porn responsible, not the little boy that looked and was drawn in, especially little boys with trauma.
Right. Yep. Right. I had a couple come to me, and they have given me permission to share this story. Their 14-year-old son came to them and said, "Mom, Dad, I've been struggling with pornography." And they were heartbroken, and thought they had the filters up and everything, right? And he told the story of what happened. And he had been at school, and he'd listened to some of his friends talking about girls they were interested in, and he realized he didn't know how to kiss a girl, right? Which, purely innocent. What a
Yes.
beautifully innocent curiosity. How do you kiss a girl? And so he went to Google, typed it in. How do you kiss a girl? And again, because as you've named well, pornographers are looking for their next customer,
Mhm.
right? And if they can get a lifetime customer, even better. And pornography showed up in the search results. And he stumbled down that dark path, and he felt too ashamed to bring it up for a while, because it felt like it was his fault.
Yeah.
But what could be more innocent than a
Hmm.
question how to kiss a girl?
Right. Which is such a reasonable question for a teenage
Right,
boy.
right.
Like, girls have these questions too. We don't talk about them as much. We all need to be talking about this stuff because,
Right.
and as a parent myself, and you're a parent, Like, it can be awkward to talk about things with your kids,
Mhm.
and they feel awkward. Everybody's awkward together. But
Yep.
when we are languaging these things and also delighting in the desire that God created for them, of course you're going to feel this way. Of
Yep.
course you're going to desire, first of all, intimacy in general. You're going to desire to be known and loved. You're going to desire physical contact. You're going to desire pleasure. Those are beautiful things. We want to
Right.
keep them in the right guardrails, of course.
Yep.
But what if we celebrated that that desire was there?
Right. 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 And blessed the lover,
Yes.
right? Bless the lover and that young man, that 14-year-old, and his curiosity and desire to kiss well.
Yes.
Right? That's a sex talk right there.
It is.
Conversation. Yeah.
Yes. And such a beautiful one. One of
Yes.
the things that I talked about in my book was the healthy non-sexual intimacy in relationships with the opposite sex. Again, a place the church has not gone as well as they would have hoped, right? Or at least as I
Mhm.
would have hoped. But how do we begin as friends understanding intimacy with the opposite sex in non-sexual ways
Yes.
that, eventually then lead into that so that we have that more fulsome understanding of what it is to be connected humans.
Yes. Right. Right. Yeah, back to Sue Johnson, and particularly around men, Sue Johnson has this quote where she talks about, when a couple comes to her and the wife says, he's really into sex. Why is that? And she says something like, I would be into sex too if it was the only place other than the football field where I got touch
Yep.
and held. Right. And again, what you're naming is like how we're set up, right? For a man, obviously that's a cultural thing. Sex isn't meant to be the only place you experience touch,
Right.
other than the football field, right? But like you're naming, like the ability to even receive healthy touch, hug, right?
Hmm.
Affection, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the only way men know how to ask for that. And I'm not saying this is an excuse, right? Because they need to grow in this is
Yeah.
by saying, I want sex. Um,
Yeah.
and often then when I ask men, well, what do you love about it? Right? They'll say things
Hmm.
like, I love feeling desired.
Yeah.
I love feeling wanted. It's one of the only places I feel wanted. It's one of the only places I can feel like I can get touch and
Hmm.
comfort.
Yeah.
And so the question becomes, what if you could take those again, that's awesome. You want those in sex,
Hmm.
right? Those are good places for it. But what if you could take that into other contexts? What if you could own you want, to be pursued? Maybe you need to talk about something. Maybe you just
Yeah.
need to emotionally connect.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think about Kirk Thompson's quote, we all come into the world looking for someone looking for us.
Yeah.
I don't think that ends. Like,
Yes.
ultimately, we find that in Jesus, of course, but that's also not the only answer, right? Like, that is an
Right.
answer. It is a wonderful answer. There are those of us who are single who that is where we are going to get that right now in lots of
Right.
ways. It's that depth, but also he created us in community for community.
Yes.
And that is such an important thing.
Yes.
And so we should be getting touch. I know you know Lori Wilbert. Is it
Yeah.
Wilbert Ferguson? Ferguson Wilbert. Anyway,
Ferguson
Shorthandle with
Wilbert.
Care. Love her
Uh-huh.
book. He, talks about what if we all understood the need for touch in the church and that desperation for that. Because,
Mhm.
I think about as a single woman, the good friends that touch me when I go to church. And sometimes that's the only physical contact I get, but there are friends that
Mhm.
look for me to hug me. And that's beautiful. There's
Right.
nothing at all sexual about it, but it's
Right.
deeply connecting.
Right.
And what a gift we give to each other when we are seen.
Yes. 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 I can remember when I was single and I was on this camping trip with this, like, we were doing like a camping trip slash like therapy dive experience. And I can remember it was men and women on this camping trip, and we were sitting around the fire, and I was processing something really painful. And I mean, it changed my life. Yeah, but I remember one of the women reached her hand over and just started rubbing my back. I mean, it was like, what? It felt so safe and so
Mhm.
good. And it was so not sexual. It was simply an offer of comfort in my pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, the body's need for that, and how that can speak love.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. One of my friends calls it skin hunger. We all have
Yeah.
it, you know,
Yes.
and I think we've distilled it down through some books and things like that too. Oh, you want, acts of service or physical touch. And it's like, no, 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 we need all of those things. We may have
Yeah.
preferences for maybe something over another thing, but we need them all.
Mhm.
And we are desperate for each other in relationship. And when we're in an intimate relationship, I think that that's an even more important, factor. It's not the
Yes.
Jerry Maguire, you complete me. I do not need someone to complete me, but I
Right.
do need someone to connect to me.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'm leaning a little bit here into Sue Johnson, but I know Sue Johnson mentions something like everyone has touch hunger.
Mhm.
She marks that, little boys are held less
Yep.
as infants than girls are. In other words, there's an inherent kind of touch deprivation
Mhm.
that men go through, possibly. Again, I'm not saying man for man, but in general. So, especially as a man, obviously that's my audience in my book. The importance of learning to find places and learning to know how to ask for touch.
Yes.
Because sometimes what's being asked for in sex is just that.
Yeah.
I can think of a woman who I quoted in my book. And again, this was not a good thing in her life. She described to me, I always knew what kind of day my husband had based on how he had sex with me that night.
Mm.
And she said, sometimes I could tell he had a bad day because I was the thing he needed to conquer at the end of
Mm.
his day. And she said it was awful. It was not intimacy. And I've reflected on her experience, which would be a form of harm,
Yeah.
long term for her to experience that. And I've thought to myself, what if that man could just say, hey, honey, I had a bad day. Can I talk about it?
Yeah.
Right. And it actually got intimacy
Yes.
rather than being stuck in his ego or his
Yes.
thirst for power. Right. I've got to conquer something. What if he could just accept it's okay to have a bad day
Right.
and you're still lovable?
Yep.
Right. What a gift that could have been to his wife as well.
Yes. Absolutely. I could talk to you all day about
Yes.
all the things. Gosh, what a beautiful, life-giving conversation. And this is one of the things, honestly, that's most important to me, even though I often work with women who have been harmed, and I do work with batterers, and I invite them into change. I invite them into accountability and change because they are missing such important things. But then there's a whole other group of men out there that I work with, that you work with, that are none of those, right? They're not batterers. They're not coercive controllers. They're men who have never been taught
Yes.
to really, truly walk in the fullness of who God created them to be in
Yes.
all their parts and ways. And
Yep.
so I love that your book invites us to something there, invites us into that space. And I will commend it to everyone, whether they are a man or a woman. I've given this to plenty of women. I give it to all the guys. All my guys get this as a referral. I'm like, you need to go read this and we're going to talk about it. But
I'm
for
so
all of my
honored.
ladies as well, I often encourage reading it because it presents a different picture than maybe they have even heard about men. And it is so beautiful. And so thank you for the book. Thank you for spending time with us here and
Mm,
for this conversation. And we 100% have to
mm,
do it again really, really soon.
mm. Tabby, I would love that. I've loved this conversation and have loved my journey into your book as well and would love to come back. It's very,
Absolutely.
very mutual.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. And all of your information will be in the description so people can find you. And thank you for hanging out here again on Hey Tabi. Thanks for joining me for today's episode of Hey Tabi. If you're looking for a resource that I mentioned in the show and you want to check out the show notes, head on over to tabithawestbrook.com/Hey Tabi. That's HEYTABI, and you can grab it there. I look forward to seeing you next time.